Hello, my name is Lee Lattimore. I'm the Remedial Project Manager for the Westside lead site. Thank you for participating and for allowing EPA the opportunity to share information about the site. As you may know, Westside lead was proposed to the EPA's National Priorities List on September 9th. EPA is taking this opportunity to talk with you and share information about what this means. I am here with Chuck Berry, the On-Scene Coordinator, and Ron Tolliver, the Community Involvement Coordinator. Chuck will be presenting the site history and background. He will also provide an update on current sampling and cleanup activities and will discuss the planned transition of site management. I will be presenting the overview of the National Priorities List as well as provide information about the next steps in the cleanup program. Lastly, Ron will cover the community involvement tools and resources.
Thanks, Lee. Again, my name is Chuck Berry, and I'm the on-scene coordinator for the Westside site. I've been involved here since the very beginning of the program back in late 2018, and I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. EPA's work here is actually made a lot easier with the more public participation we have. So I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. So let's start at the beginning and quickly recap how we got here. Why is EPA working on the west side of Atlanta? Well, in 2018, an Emory University student was studying urban gardens and found some high lead levels on properties near the Elm Street Garden. Further investigation found slag on nearby properties. Slag is the byproduct of smelting ores. It's the stuff out of the ore that you don't want. And there were a lot of foundries operating in Atlanta around the turn of the 20th century, around 1900. Prior to 1974, there were no legal restrictions on using that slag for whatever purpose you wanted to, and a lot of times it was used as fill. This is a pretty common nationwide issue where slag was used as fill. Not all slag is a problem, but some slag contains high levels of heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, and cadmium, and the slag here in West Atlanta contains high lead levels and a little bit of arsenic in it. Well, Emory University turned this information over to Georgia EPD, and Georgia EPD requested EPA do its own investigation. Based on that request from Georgia EPD, EPA's Superfund Emergency Response Branch, where I work, started sampling in March of 2019. We started with a small 60 parcel block around the Elm Street Garden and quickly determined the contamination extended beyond that boundary. We expanded the project in July to 368 properties and continued to sample where we could get access. We've gone through that same iterative process 3 times now, where we collect data from the expanded area and determine if we've bounded the contamination. Currently, the site is composed of roughly 2,100 properties in the English Avenue and Vine City neighborhoods. EPA has not determined if the latest iteration of the boundary encapsulates the extent of contamination, and we will notify the public if we determine a need for further expansion. In January of 2020, we determined the risk to residents could no longer wait for action, and we initiated a response action under EPA's emergency removal authorities to excavate contaminated soil from selected high-risk properties. Also at this time, it became apparent that the scope of the project was likely going to outgrow Superfund's emergency response program's capabilities. So we discussed the site with the remedial branch of Superfund and agreed that a handoff of the site was likely to happen, and the remedial branch started their investigative process. In June of 2020, the remedial branch took over the sampling of properties and began collecting data for their rigorous scientific process. So what is our status now? Of the roughly 2,100 lots within our current footprint, we have access to 874. We've sampled 772. 318 have lead concentrations greater than 400 parts per million, the site-specific action level we've set here. So for the last 19 months, we've been excavating and remediating properties. Of the 318 we've identified, we've completed removal actions at 94 of those. I should note here that we prioritize properties for removal based upon who lives there, with children and pregnant women getting the highest priority for removal. But there still are 224 properties left to be excavated and remediated under the current setup. So a little math will show you that we're averaging about 5 properties per month. And under the current scope, it'll take us nearly 4 more years to complete this. And we expect to add dozens, if not hundreds of more properties to the program. So EPA feels like we need to modify our approach to best address the problem. But how do we do that? Well, as it turns out, we have a solution. When Congress wrote the Superfund law, it realized this would probably happen. So it devised two main pathways for sites to take: the emergency response removal path, where we are today, and the remedial NPL path, the one that we're proposing to take in the future. And so I've listed out the differences between the two programs here, and you can see how the ER program is really designed to be a short-term project. In fact, Congress wrote into the law time and dollar limits on our authority to act, fully expecting longer-term sites to follow the NPL pathway. I've already had to request an exemption of those limits for the Westside lead site, and if I ask for additional exemptions, of course the question will be, are you pursuing this as an NPL site? And yes, we're doing exactly that and have been for a couple of years now. But the NPL process is very scientifically rigorous, it's very methodical, and it takes a lot of time. And that's on purpose because they're going to be spending a lot of money here and they want to make sure that your tax dollars are spent in the most prudent fashion possible. But again, it just takes time to work through that. In this case, at the Westside lead site, the emergency response program is serving as a bridge to span that time gap until the NPL process can play out. To provide some specifics on the benefits of transitioning the site, we need to examine the region's emergency response budget. Westside lead consumes about 1/3 of the region's $17 million emergency response budget. While sustainable in the short term, Region 4 covers an 8-state southeast region. There are other sites with other people at risk that need to be addressed and for which the NPL process is not available. The sites do not meet the NPL requirements. The ER program is the only way those sites will be resolved, and so we need to be able to apply funds as they're needed. Locking up 1/3 of our annual budget at Westside lead restricts our ability to respond. And as an ER program, we lack the luxury of being able to plan what comes our way. We have to be able to respond to whatever happens. So our funding stream through the ER program is potentially more tenuous than we would like for a site of this magnitude and importance. The NPL program, however, has dedicated funding streams that can provide a more secure funding with dedicated allocations that aren't subject to external forces. The NPL process is money in the bank. Additionally, the NPL process can apply those funds quicker, mobilizing more resources to deal with the problem faster. That means a faster cleanup and less risk to the community overall. Another benefit of transitioning is that the NPL process provides a much greater potential for community involvement. Those specifics will be discussed later in tonight's program, but just be aware that the NPL process has a much more rigorous community involvement requirement than the ER program does. And I want to finish up tonight by saying that, for the time being though, the ER program is not going anywhere. Region 4 remains committed to providing the required resources for the site up until the time the remedial branch takes over, which is expected to happen in the spring of 2023. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lee Lattimore, who's the remedial project manager for the site, who will walk y'all through the NPL process and go through some of the expected benefits this will bring. I want to thank everyone for listening tonight, and if you have any questions, I'll be here at the end to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. The National Priorities List, or the NPL, is a list of priority sites that require thorough investigation and cleanup. EPA is broken up into 10 regions. Westside lead is located in Region 4 and noted in purple on the right. There are just under 200 sites that are currently on the NPL in Region 4. EPA adds sites to the NPL when contamination threatens human health and the environment. The NPL guides EPA in identifying and prioritizing those sites that warrant further assessment of public health and environmental risks. The sites are deleted once all response actions are completed and all cleanup goals have been achieved. Westside lead qualifies for the next step in the Superfund process, which is inclusion on EPA's NPL. EPA has evaluated the risk to residents posed by this contamination and has determined that cleanup is warranted for several hundred residential properties. EPA's priority is a comprehensive approach that addresses all contamination related to the former foundry operations that surrounded the community. The Westside lead site was proposed to the NPL on September 9th. Once a site is proposed, a 60-day public comment period starts. EPA will accept written comments through November 8th. EPA will address the comments before the site is finalized on the NPL. Currently, it is expected that the site will be finalized in the spring of 2022. Materials compiled by the EPA to propose the Westside lead site to the NPL can be obtained 3 ways. The first way is through regulations.gov. In the search bar, you must type in the docket number for the Westside lead site, which is EPA-HQ-OLEM-2021-0454. The second way is through EPA's website. You can see what that looks like to the right. Lastly, you can contact the NPL coordinator, Quinn Kelly, for the documentation at kelly.quinn@epa.gov or by calling her at 404-562-8899. You can also comment on the proposed listing through regulations.gov, EPA's website, or through the mail at the address noted here. Please remember, all submissions received must include the docket ID number. Again, that is EPA-HQ-OLEM-2021-0454 when you're submitting comments. Cleaning up Superfund sites is a complex, multi-phase process with the main goal of protecting human health and the environment while working with the community. The Superfund process is shown to the right, and each step is unique. I'm going to walk you through each one of them. Please note, sampling and cleanup work as well as community engagement will continue throughout the process, and the residents will not see an interruption in work. The preliminary assessment phase involves gathering historical and other available information about the site conditions to evaluate whether the site poses a threat to human health and the environment. It also makes a determination if further investigation is needed. Information about the site that is collected in the preliminary assessment phase helps EPA to evaluate the risk posed by the site using the hazard ranking system. EPA started the residential cleanup work under the removal program as the preliminary assessment started. Using the hazard ranking system, sites that score at or above an established level qualify for cleanup under Superfund's Remedial program and are proposed for listing on the National Priorities List, or the NPL. Now that Westside Lead is proposed on the NPL, EPA will perform a remedial investigation to gather data needed to characterize site conditions, determine the nature and extent of contamination, and assess the risk to human health and the environment. The feasibility study will evaluate and compare remedial alternatives to address and mitigate unacceptable risks posed by the contamination. The proposed plan identifies EPA's preferred method of cleanup. There's a 30-day public comment period soliciting community input. The Record of Decision issues the cleanup decision. It includes responses to public comments and explains which cleanup method or methods will be used at the site. The remedial design and remedial action phase includes preparing for and cleaning up the site. Once the remedial action starts under the remedial program, the cleanup work under the removal program will end. The site will be deleted from the NPL once the remedial action has been completed. Here's the remedial timeline. The remedial investigation and feasibility study are planned to be completed in the summer of next year. The proposed plan, which identifies EPA's preferred cleanup method, is scheduled to be completed a year from now. This is important to note since there's a 30-day public comment period soliciting community and stakeholder input. The Record of Decision is scheduled for late fall of 2022. The remedial design is scheduled to be completed by early 2023, and the planned remedial action is scheduled to begin in the spring of 2023. This is the point where the remedial program starts the cleanup work and the removal program ends their work. Again, please note, sampling and cleanup work will continue throughout the remedial process, and the residents will not see an interruption in work. I am now going to pass this on to Ron Tolliver, the Community Involvement Coordinator.
Thanks, Chuck and Lee, for bringing us current with the site updates and also explaining to us what it means to have the site on the National Priorities List. Now we'll talk about Superfund community involvement. My name is Ron Tolliver. I'm your Community Involvement Coordinator. Community involvement is the name EPA uses to identify its process for engaging in dialogue and collaboration with communities affected by Superfund sites. Community involvement is a core component of the Superfund process and very important that we have your input. Community involvement is how EPA makes sure your concerns and interests are included in agency decision making. This collaborative process produces better outcomes for everyone, resulting in stronger remedies that protect the health and the environment of the people. Now, we'll talk about some of the tools that EPA uses or invests in to help the community organize, contribute to, and understand the Superfund process of cleanup in their community. So I'll explain some of these tools that are available to you all as community members. Here are two tools that are commonly used initially in the Superfund community involvement process: the Technical Assistance Needs Assessment, or TANA, and the Community Advisory Group, or CAG. As EPA has initial discussions with the community, we will determine if the community as a whole has problems understanding and receiving technical information. Also, any resources that are available to help with facilitating that technical understanding in the community. After those technical needs of the community have been determined, the next tool is called the Community Advisory Group, or CAG. CAGs facilitate communication between EPA and the community. They are utilized in communities that do not have an organized structure. Now, the community here at Westside currently has organized groups that could potentially function as CAGs, so the CAG tool may not be needed. After a group has been recognized by EPA, they may qualify for a tool we call the Technical Assistance Grant, or TAG. This tool can help the community further understand technical information associated with the site cleanup. A community group needs to be organized with the grant administrator that understands the federal procurement process in order to be a successful applicant for a TAG. All funds are reimbursable and must be approved by EPA before reimbursement. And then the final tool that we'll discuss is probably our most popular option. It is called the Technical Assistance Services for Communities, or TASC tool. If there are specific needs of the community outside of a recognized CAG, the TASC tool may be able to meet them. Communities that can take advantage of a TASC resources without organizational requirements that come with the CAG. This tool provides the services mentioned previously and more under a national EPA contract. Here are some examples of TASC program services. I would like to highlight one of the program services called the Superfund Job Training Initiative, or SuperJTI. This program allows EPA to work with its contractors to support the local employment of community members near the site by training them to potentially work on the site. The photos shown here were taken at a SuperJTI program in Florida. These are community members that came to learn about the SuperJTI program, and members that made it through the program were trained and became certified to clean hazardous waste. Applicants often mention that they were excited and grateful to be able to work and get their certifications at no cost. Now, that concludes the community involvement tools and resources part of the presentation. Next, you will hear from Franklin Sanchez and Faith Flack Walker. They will present on the community health assessment.
Good evening. I'm Franklin Sanchez with the Georgia Department of Public Health's Chemical Hazards Program. I'm going to speak on the public health assessment process, and our health educator will speak on community involvement activities in the West Atlanta community after me. Our program is funded by a cooperative agreement grant from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry to produce public health assessments in the state of Georgia. To give you a background on ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry is a non-regulatory federal public health agency. ATSDR protects communities from harmful effects related to exposure to natural and man-made hazardous substances. This is done by evaluating public health implications of exposures to hazardous substances when responding to environmental health emergencies, investigating emerging environmental health threats, conducting research on the health impacts of hazardous waste sites, and building capabilities of and providing actionable guidance to state and local health partners. The Chemical Hazards Program was established in 1996 through a cooperative agreement grant from the ATSDR, and as such, we are charged with conducting public health assessments, public health consultations, and community involvement activities at MPL sites and accepted petition sites in Georgia. The health assessment process is triggered by a national priority listing, a petition to ATSDR from a community member, or another agency request. ATSDR has developed a method to evaluate the public health implications of exposures to environmental contamination. The ATSDR health assessment process is a mechanism for identifying appropriate public health actions for particular communities. The purpose of the public health assessment is to find out whether there are chemicals in your community, if those chemicals can get into your body, and if these chemicals can affect your health. Protective recommendations are made to prevent or reduce exposure to hazardous chemicals. Recommendations can teach you ways to protect yourself until the hazardous chemical is cleaned up. The health assessment process also serves as a mechanism to investigate health concerns of people in the community. The health assessment process begins with collecting multiple data sets that include environmental data, exposure data, health effects data, and community health concerns. The process involves two primary scientific evaluations, the exposure evaluation and the health effects evaluation. The exposure evaluation is the hallmark of the public health assessment process. We review environmental data to see how much contamination is at a site, where it is, and how many people come into contact with it. We do not collect our own sampling data, but review information provided by federal and state governmental agencies and/or their contractors or potentially responsible parties or the public. When environmental data is not available, we will indicate further environmental sampling that may be needed. If the exposure evaluation shows that people come into contact with hazardous substances, we evaluate whether this contact may result in harmful effects. We recognize that children, because of their size and growing bodies, may be particularly vulnerable to site-related exposures. Thus, impact to children is considered first when evaluating the health threat to a community. The process is iterative and dynamic and may lead to a variety of products and outcomes. For example, the findings may be communicated in public health assessment and public health consultation documents or an issued public health advisory if there is an urgent public health threat. These products serve as an aid for developing public health actions meant to prevent or reduce environmental exposures to a community. This is my contact information. Now I will turn it over to Faith Flack Walker, our health educator.
Hi everyone, I'm Faith Flack Walker and I'm the health educator for the Chemical Hazards Program at the Georgia Department of Public Health. I will be explaining the role of health education DPH takes on and the role of the public health assessment process. Various health activities may be considered depending on the degree of exposure that has been identified, the overall level of health concern in the community, and the findings of the public health assessment. Considerations for recommended actions will be drawn from site-specific public health conclusions and include activities aimed at further evaluating the health status of the community or educating the community about health effects related to the site. Recommended actions may include performing health studies or health surveillance, or conducting health education through community outreach or materials designed specifically for the site that includes information about specific types of exposures, exposure routes and pathways, health effects, and how to prevent or minimize exposures to hazardous substances in the environment. These health education activities for a site are often accomplished over the course of the public health assessment process. DPH has past and current involvement with health education and community outreach in the study area. One way we've been involved is by providing technical assistance for community outreach activities. For example, In recent months, we participated in 2 neighborhood canvassing events to increase awareness of lead in soil and provide resources to residents to learn more about getting their soil tested with EPA and encourage blood lead testing among children. We provided lead training to volunteers and addressed health-related questions on lead prior to, during, and after the events. We have also created fact sheets and other informative materials. Our lead fact sheet provides ways to reduce exposure to lead inside and outside of the home. Our urban gardening fact sheet provides tips and best practices for safe gardening in urban areas. In the past few years, we have also held soil shops, which is a health education tool used to provide basic lead screenings and information on ways to reduce lead exposure in your yard or while gardening, ways to prevent lead poisoning in and around the home, how to get additional soil testing done, and where children can go to get tested if lead exposure is a concern. Additionally, I have a few tips on ways to reduce lead exposure. One way we encourage this is through the practice of safe gardening. You can do this by building raised beds or using container gardens, making sure that you wash and peel all vegetables and root crops that are in direct contact with soil, cleaning your tools, gloves, and shoes before bringing them indoors, and washing soiled clothing promptly, and washing hands after gardening, even if gloves are used. We also recommend reducing dust in your home that may contain lead. You can do this by wet mopping hard floors and cleaning windowsills with wet rags regularly, vacuuming carpets and rugs before mopping non-carpeted areas, and if possible, using a vacuum with a HEPA filter, making sure that you're aware of other possible sources of lead, like lead paint in older homes. When lead paint cracks and peels or is disturbed, it can contribute to lead dust. We also advise that you don't let children play in soil contaminated with lead. Keep children from playing in bare soil, and if you have bare areas in your yard, you can cover these areas with grass, bushes, or 4 to 6 inches of lead-free wood chips, mulch, soil, or sand. We also advise watching small children to prevent them from ingesting soil through hand-to-mouth contact. We also recommend avoiding bringing lead-contaminated soil inside from outside. You can make sure you do this by taking off outerwear and shoes before entering your home, bathing your pets regularly that go outside, and making sure that you're washing your hands frequently, especially after coming in from outside. Lastly, we encourage eating healthy foods. Feeding your child healthy foods with calcium, iron, and vitamin C can help decrease lead from being absorbed in the body. Additional tips and guidance can be found on EPA's website, as well as our website listed below. If you have any questions about our health education activities or the online materials that were mentioned, feel free to contact me by phone or email.
Thank you, Franklin and Faith, for your presentations. That concludes tonight's presentations. We are now going to open it up to questions and answers. Please enter your question in the chat box. The moderator and Ron will acknowledge each question in the order they come in and read them out loud. If you are on the phone, you'll have to press *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name before asking your question.